of blacks, 53%, quote, believe that blacks who have not gotten ahead in life are mainly responsible for their own situation, unquote. A careful analysis of these data revealed that, unlike in previous years, younger African Americans are more likely to support this view than older blacks, believe it or not. Now, I believe that the emphasis on individualistic explanations of economic and social outcomes contributes to a good deal of the opposition to affirmative action programs, especially affirmative action initiatives that are seen as programs of racial preference. Now, in response to cries from conservatives to abolish affirmative action, some liberals have argued that we ought to shift from affirmative action programs based on race to affirmative action programs based on economic class or need. Although it is not readily apparent that a shift to class-based affirmative action would overcome the bias for individualistic explanations of social outcomes, it could be seen as nullifying some of the negative racial perceptions that undermine support for affirmative action. Specifically, a shift to class-based affirmative action would recognize that the problems of the disadvantaged, low income, crime-ridden neighborhoods, broken homes, inadequate housing, poor education, cultural and linguistic differences are not always clearly related to previous racial discrimination. Children who grow up in homes plagued by these disadvantages are likely to be denied an equal chance in life because the development of their aspirations and talents is hindered by their environment, regardless of race. Proponents of class-based affirmative action argue that people of color would benefit disproportionately from programs designed to address these disadvantages, since they suffer disproportionately from the effects of such environments. But the problems of disadvantaged whites would be addressed as well. Now, I would like to argue this. Despite the apparent appeal of this approach, class-based affirmative action, if affirmative action were based solely on economic need, it would reduce, not enhance or improve opportunities for blacks. More specifically, it would result, class-based affirmative action programs would result in the systematic exclusion of many blacks from desirable positions, since they would be judged by conventional measures of aptitude, and regardless of class, their scores on those tests are still likely to show the cumulative effects of race. By this I mean the effects of having one's life choices limited by race, the effects of living in segregated neighborhoods and being exposed to the particular skills and styles of behavior that emerge from patterns of racial exclusion, the effects of attending lower quality de facto segregated schools and of being nurtured by parents whose own experiences and resources have also been shaped and limited by race. number of empirical studies have revealed significant differences in the family environment and neighborhood environment of blacks and whites that are understated when standard measures of socioeconomic status, SES, are employed. Take, for example, the question of family environment. Even when white parents and black parents report the same average income, white parents have substantially more assets than do black parents. Whites with the same amount of schooling as blacks usually attend better high schools and colleges. Furthermore, children's test scores are affected not only by the social and economic status of their parents, but also by the social and economic status of their grandparents. This means that it could take several generations before adjustments in socioeconomic inequality produce their full benefits. Thus, if we were to rely solely on the standard criteria for college admission, like SAT scores, even many children from black middle-income families would be denied admission in favor of middle-income whites who are not weighed down by the accumulation of disadvantages that stem from racial restrictions and who therefore tend to score higher on these conventional tests. However, what is true for middle-class blacks is even more true for the black poor, who would not compete well with comparable whites because of the race factor. In an impressive study that analyzed data from a national longitudinal study with methods designed to measure intergenerational economic mobility, the sociologist Patrick Sharkey, one of my former students who's now at New York University, found that, and I quote, more than 70% of black children who are raised in the poorest quarter of American neighborhoods, in other words, the bottom 25% in terms of average neighborhood income, will continue to live in the poorest quarter of neighborhoods as adults. 70%. He also found that since the 1970s, a majority of black families have resided in the poorest quarter of neighborhoods in consecutive generations, compared to only 7% of white families. Thus, he concludes that the disadvantages of living in poor black neighborhoods, like the advantages of living in affluent white neighborhoods, are in large measure inherited. We should also consider another path-breaking study that Sharkey co-authored with senior investigator Robert Sampson, one of my colleagues at Harvard University in the sociology department, and another colleague, Stephen Rottenbush of the University of Chicago, that examined the effects of concentrated poverty on black children's verbal ability. And they studied a representative sample of 750 African American children ages 6 to 12 who are growing up in the city of Chicago in 1995, and they followed them anywhere they moved in the United States for up to 7 years. The children were given a reading examination and vocabulary test at 3 different periods. And their study showed, quote, that residing in a severely disadvantaged neighborhood cumulatively impedes the development of academically relevant verbal ability in children, unquote. And this research raises important questions about ways in which neighborhoods may alter growth in verbal ability, producing effects that linger on even if a child leaves a severely disadvantaged neighborhood. Now, the studies by Sharkey and Sampson and his colleagues both suggest that neighborhood effects are not so